There we go.
Artlist.io. Check, you can tell me none. Boss mode in effect, and my money long. If you ain't talking money, don't talk to me. I be over here. Music.
Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Paranormal Addicts podcast. I've lost track of how many episodes we are. I think we're 14. But anyway, our guest this week is Pat. So, Pat, introduce yourself to everybody, and then we will get started.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Pat Fitzhugh, hailing from Nashville, Tennessee. I've been researching the Bell Witch and been a paranormal investigator and all things paranormal for 46 years tonight, and really looking forward to this discussion, and hope to hear a lot of good questions from the audience, and whatever we could do to have fun.
All right. So, we'll just go ahead and jump in. And like we were talking about earlier, most of the time when people have you on as a guest or, whatever, the first thing that they like to talk about is the Bell Witch, because it's probably one of the most known haunted locations around, especially in Tennessee, because you're not too far away from me. So about 2 hours, I guess, with me being in Paducah, you're about 2 hours. So, we've all seen the Bill Witch movie and stuff. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your research of the Bill Witch and what you discovered and all that stuff.
Okay, well, I became interested in the legend as a child. My mother, who grew up very near Ground Zero in the Bell Witch legend, over in Cedar Hill, Tennessee, in her early years, she had heard about the story all her life, of course, growing up there. And she told me about it at a very young age, and I enjoyed listening to all of her stories and also some stories from my father and my uncle. They were from southern Kentucky, just a little bit over the line from where Adams, Tennessee, home of the Bell Witch is. So I was interested for a good while, and then, after a point, I asked the question, how could any of this be true, or what caused all this to start? So I embarked on a journey of seriously researching the people, places, and all other information involved in the legend. And now we're 46 years after that. And, I'll have to admit that, I thought early on that researching it and getting to the bottom of what started the story would have taken maybe a few months, just a summer project when I was in junior high school. But, all these years later, I think I'm still just, yet to even scratch the surface. It's like every answer yields 20 more questions. So, that's what makes the haunting so it's so perplexing. And then you have, the idea of real people in real places. A lot of hauntings, ghost stories you hear, if you start trying to research those, you won't find the people mentioned, or some of the places won't exist and all that. But with the Bell Witch, the easy part is verifying that the people really existed, and the places. So the research and writing, it's been a long ride. I have I have done a couple of books on that subject and a couple of other paranormal books as well. But the Bell Witch has been a pet project, and I've done some TV and movie stuff along the way. And of course, I do the uh, interviews, like podcast, or basically anything that anything people want to listen to. I'm there to celebrate the legend of the Bell Witch, to promote the legend, and hopefully shed some researched light on the legend. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. So I mean, let's talk a little bit about the Blair Witch. I mean, I get, you know, have you found through your research that most of the legend is true, or you think it's exaggerated? I mean, you know, um,
Yeah, well, there is no way to prove that it's true, and even when you're talking about the backstory and pieces and people and places, there's a lot that still can't be proved because the passage of time erodes away at documents and other evidence. There are a lot of different angles that people can take when looking at the legend. In my case, all I'm looking for is what started the story, whether it be a person or people working in collusion or a series of paranormal events. It is a very embellished case. What I've been able to find is that it started out as a very, very small thing and one certain type of event, and something that, well, I call it small. Back then, it was huge. It was enough to drive visitors from all over just to try to figure out what it was. And, over the years, the story has grown bigger and bigger. There have been some embellishments along the line, a couple of books that have taken this minor first incident and, expounded upon that to include just about every story or incident known in the world of folklore at the time it was written. So, only inserting the names of the Bell family to make it, more applicable to the Bell family at Red River. So it's very interesting legend. I don't feel the magic question has been solved. I feel that it can be, and some people, one in particular, is well on the way to doing that. Uh, so if you're looking at the legend from a researcher's standpoint, there's definitely some light at the end of the tunnel. If you're looking at the legend from a sheer enjoyment standpoint, because you like to hear Bellwitch stories, you're in good shape there too. New Bellwitch stories are coming out every day, and it will never die. So, it's the best of both worlds for story fans and researchers.
okay, we have our first question. You answered half of it because Damien asked, when did you first decide to research this type of investigation? And you said that you just grew up with it. And then he asked, what was the first evidence that you decided to look for? There it is.
The year was 1978, and the first evidence I started searching for was whether or not there was really a man named John Bell who lived in Robertson County in the year 1817. And then I started, after that, looking for the other characters. I thought, even then, I was so young then, I thought it senseless to research and investigate a case when you don't even know if the people were real. So that was the first thing I went after. And the second thing was, did they actually live in Red River? People and places, the ground zero and the people involved. That is like the cornerstone to the research. You've got to have that in place and know whom and what you're researching if you're going to, conduct serious research.
Right, and the Bill Witch, like you said, it's been told for years and embellished and everything else. We even got what President Andrew Jackson is, supposedly quoted, about it. So I mean, it's important to know if the people were actually even real. Uh, Here's our next question. Bob wants to
Yeah.
know if you know Tyler Leanne.
If I know what, I didn't catch the last part. I'm
Tyler
sorry.
Leanne.
Leanne.
Todd and Leanna.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Black Wolf Paranormal, I believe that is. They actually do investigations over to Bell Witch Cave, if that's the same Todd and Leanne I think you're talking about.
It is.
Uh, so what I didn't get was the question. I'm pretty hard of hearing these days. So what was it? What was that question that had been asked?
He just asked. He just asked if you're familiar with them. That was. He just asked if you knew who they were. That was
Oh,
all it was.
okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I thought they were the ones that were asking the question. Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with who they are. They are.
yeah, yeah,
I'm not sure
yeah.
exactly where they live, but I know that
Todd's actually.
they are Middle Tennessee based. Black Wolf, I believe it is. I think I mistakenly called them Dark Wolf on another interview when I was
It is Black Wolf. Yeah.
promoting their investigations, but it's actually the Black Wolf Paranormal, and they've been very intimately involved with the tours and everything up at Waverly Hills in the past, and they're always out doing something. And once a month, they're doing these Bell Witch Cave investigations now. So yeah, I'm definitely familiar with them and what their group does.
Todd's actually speaking at my Paracon in October.
Oh, awesome! That
I have a question.
Go,
Um,
Chris.
do you know? Do you believe there's a curse on the land, on the Bellwitch land?
well, I I can't rule it in for sure,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't really rule it out. You know, I get that question a lot, as well as is there a curse on the Bell family? And where I struggle is that with as much research as I've done into the cursing phenomenon, and I mean long, serious research, I'm not comfortable with saying that I believe 100% that
Mm-hmm.
such a thing as a curse even exists. There's also such a thing as a coincidence. There's also a strange coincidence. There's also such a thing as a string of strange coincidences. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not 100% sure a curse is even a thing
Mm-hmm.
other than, in writing and in movies and folk tales and that sort of thing. However, I will say that a lot of people, including some researchers over the years, have said that it appeared that there could have been some type of curse
Mm-hmm.
on the land, and that the entity or catalyst for the Bell Witch disturbances was attached to the land.
Hmm.
And that one popular paranormal theory, in fact, I actually covered it and one of my books, was a portal theory, whereas there was a portal or gateway to the other side at the Bell Witch property,
Hmm.
and an act or series of acts took place, possibly at the hands of the Bell family,
Hmm.
that opened up this portal or opened up this door and let all of this stuff in.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting. And also, there has long been a Native American presence on the land. I mean, we had the Cherokee, and before that, there were other tribes that used it as a hunting ground, like the Creeks, the Chickasaws, and a few others. And then we go back farther in time to the Mississippian culture and the great mound builders.
Hmm.
And I mean, there are Native American graves there in the area. They have been found on and around the old Bell Farm. A lot of Native American history there.
Hmm.
And some feel that the Bell disturbances were the result of Native American spirits. For example, one of the earliest apparitions that was claimed was seeing something with the head of a rabbit and the body of a dog. And this was
Ooh.
John Bell ex- uh, checking his cornrows one day. And some Native American people, including a shaman, explained to me that this would, it would loosely be considered a shape shifting entity because other things were seen as well. But that
Skinwalker?
they, mm, don't know, could be.
Oh.
That's a real popular buzzword these days.
Hmm.
I'll have to admit that I haven't done much study or research into the exact skinwalker entity. But these Native American people pointed out that it appeared to be, or possibly could have been, a spirit by the name of Trickster,
Hmm.
a shapeshifter, or an entity that can manifest in different forms and was not always malevolent, but wasn't always good either. But it could play tricks and it could be fairly malevolent if it wanted to be.
Hmm.
That's an interesting. I mean, way to look at it, and that would explain, you know, a lot of the folklore or whatever you want to say about the Bill Witch. You know, I'm actually I actually study Native American paranormal activity a lot because I'm actually a 1/8 Cherokee. My great grandmother was actually a Cherokee medicine woman, and so that's where they think I got my gift of being able to communicate with. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, so yeah, that would make a lot of sense and explain a lot. Uh, you think maybe it could be an elemental?
Elemental, you can't rule that out. The biggest thing I've noticed about elementals, and this has been going on for years, ever since some very, very early investigations, even before the internet, some investigations that I had, people were discussing elementals. And that is, it seems that a lot of different people have a lot of definitions of an elemental. So, from there, the Bell Witch entity could very well fall into a lot of people's definition of an elemental. I mean, we can't, using paranormal theories, we can't rule out an elemental under the more popular definitions of an elemental. Me personally, I was taught that an elemental is a ball of energy, very much like a poltergeist, except it doesn't attack or bang on things. It's a ball of energy that is neither male nor female and has no intelligence and likes to just goof off with people's EMF meters. Now, whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, I don't know. Like I say, there's so many different definitions out there.
Hmm.
You know, it depends on who you ask whether I'm right or wrong. But some of the more popular definitions, sure, the Bell Witch could fall into that category. What I do think, that when assessing, the different characteristics and where this thing fell along the continuum of entities, is that if you follow, like for example, the novel written by a man named Ingram in the 1890s, um, he claims this thing started out uh, is that initial manifestation. Then we start hearing stories of poltergeist type activity, banging on the walls, uh,
Door slamming.
chains, yeah, things like that a poltergeist type activity would do. But then later on, the family allegedly began testing this thing to see if it possessed intelligence by asking it questions. How many horses are tied up outside? How far is it to Port Royal? And the thing would answer with a certain number of raps on the wall. Now we go back to definitions. There's a million definitions out there for poltergeist. The easy one is noisy ghost. And I think most everybody agrees on that. But it's when we go further into the research of a poltergeist is where there's a lot of disagreement. For me personally, I've always been taught, studied, and believed that a poltergeist possesses no intelligence. It's a malevolent form of energy released from malformed brain waves of the person who is considered the agent, and they may or may not even know that their brain waves are producing this activity. It happens spontaneously, can happen anytime, and we call it recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK for short. At least that's my definition. So, what I'm driving at, again, assuming my definition, is that once this entity, whatever it was, exhibited some intelligence, it moved away from the classification as being a poltergeist. Then later on, we learned where it developed a little bit of a whisper. And over time, as more people came to witness these disturbances and more attention and fear was in the air, the stronger this thing grew to the point that it could be understood and it could speak intelligently. So, looking at different entity characteristics, you know, I don't see the Bell Witch as a poltergeist or an elemental or a spirit. I mean, a spirit possesses intelligence. Okay, what I see could be, a whole conglomeration of multi entities at the command of a much higher entity, conjured and commanded by a higher type entity. Um, it's very interesting when you try to put that along the continuum and look at the different, characteristics of the different entities. And even more interesting when you find out there are so many different opinions about what constitutes these entities.
Hmm.
So Bob said, and I've heard this before too, that some say the Native Americans would bring a thought form to life to go out the land, and that's actually considered an elemental. So,
Yes,
and
yes.
and then somewhere I lost it. Damien said, obviously the Bill Witch, is classified, as a witch, but Damien said with the Irish connection, it's actually more fitting to be considered a banshee.
Okay, I have not heard of Banshee before, and I'm not sure of what the Irish connection would be. Um, but, when we talk about witch, that's interesting. Now, people, at least nowadays, or at least most people who are pretty well informed, know what a witch is. But back then, the term was used loosely, very loosely, to describe anything that people could not understand and or which they were not strong enough to deal with, and which was not listed or mentioned in the Bible. They would label it evil or malevolent. And then with the witch trials in Salem in the late 1600s, the word witch got around and attached to any type of malevolent activity. Anything malevolent was supposedly uh, a, somebody doing witchcraft. It didn't matter what type of witchcraft, green magic, black magic, what have you. Now there is something, of course, called black magic that where it can be practiced to instill misfortune on others, but that's just one type of magic that the witches practice. But at any rate, the term witch had one heck of a stigma attached to it in the early 1800s. And with all of this stuff going on, happen, doors closing and opening, children getting slapped, all these whispers being heard at night, all this happening in John Bell's house, obviously people would say or refer to it as a witch. And, whether all this happened as a result of someone practicing black magic witchcraft, who knows? I mean, who knows if it happened? We've got to look at so many different things, and that's where the research comes in.
It's
But
something that you cannot explain.
correct, not, it's there was so much going on in that short 4 year period of time, and I mentioned earlier, pretty much every type of experience or character mentioned in the Bell Witch legend as part of the actual haunting can be found in a lot of other ghost stories and folklore uh, prior to 1894 when that book was written.
Hmm.
But it seems that between 1817 1821, it all just culminated in a whirlwind right there on the John Bell farm. And, as a researcher, first question I have to answer is, did it? And if not, the second question, if it didn't happen that way, what did happen to give rise to the story? And there is proof. There is definitely proof that something was amiss on the John Bell farm back in those days. Um, but, takes a lot of analysis to see, whether it was really a miss, who all experienced and all that. And that's something I'm working on now, but I'm not ready to release the findings on it yet. But it will prove that there was something going on back then.
Hmm.
And whether it was paranormal or whether it was caused by a human, that is something we'll probably won't know because it could happen as a result of either.
Hmm.
It's interesting. I mean, it's so interesting, and I like the fact, like you said, taking it from a researcher standpoint, because obviously, that's what I consider myself. I consider myself a researcher. I'm not a ghost hunter. I'm not a none of that. I don't have ghost heads hanging on my wall. You know, I research. I research everything. The history. I want evidence. I want to try to find evidence one way or the other. You know, So yeah. Um, so you know, let's move on from the Bill Witch a little bit. You know, because obviously that's not all you do. Uh, we were
Right.
chatting yesterday. I think it was day before yesterday, whenever it was. About other locations that we both investigated. So let's talk about Octagon Horror in Franklin, Kentucky. Uh, for the people who don't know much about Octagon Horror, it's actually considered one of the most haunted locations in the South, if you consider Kentucky part of the South, which I do. Um, but it has a lot of Civil War history, and stuff. And
Yeah, it's a great place to investigate and a whole lot of history there. That was it. I think Andrew Jackson Caldwell, the original owner, broke ground in about, I think it was 1847, and I think the place was completed in about 1859. And it was a key place in the Civil War. Uh, Initially after Fort Donelson and Fort Henry to the west were taken, the Confederates up in Bowling Green, where they had a stronghold, retreated down to Octagon Hall and camped out there and house, the grounds, everything for a while before retreating on towards where was it? On down into Tennessee. And then shortly after that, the Union troops came in looking for the Confederate troops that had retreated to there. But they were a couple days too late. So the place has been occupied by both Union and Confederate troops. And it was a known fact that Mr. Caldwell and his family were Confederate supporters. So as a result, Union troops were coming by there all the time looking for hidden soldiers. And the story has it that they hid them up underneath the front stairs. If you're down in the basement, there's a door at one end, the opposite end of where the kitchen is. And you go through that door and then another one, and you can see a great little hiding place under the steps. And the Union stories actually got the Union troops were actually at a point where they would harass the Caldwells. And one story has it that they killed one of the Caldwell's cows and then took the dead carcass and threw it into the well to contaminate the drinking water.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of history there. Mr. Caldwell died in 1866. Uh, he also had a wife and some children. His wife was Harriet, and he had children. There was Frances, Martha, Mary Elizabeth, and Henry. And Harriet ended up living there all the way up until 1918 when she sold it to a Dr. Williams out of Nashville.
Hmm.
Sadly, uh, two of the children died at young ages, Mary Elizabeth and Henry. And they, along with Harriet, are buried in the graveyard. I call it graveyard number one, which is behind the house as you're going out to the number two graveyard, the slave graveyard out in the field. Um,
You're talking about the one with the stone wall around it
yes,
for the
sir.
family. Yeah,
Yes, sir. It's got about a 2.5, 3 foot stone wall around it.
yeah. I,
Here,
I knew the kid. I knew the kids were buried there. I didn't know the wife. So that's interesting there. Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
I'm sorry.
What is? I have a question. What is up with the like this type of magic, satanic rituals and stuff? What is up with that? I'm curious.
I would not know.
Oh,
Not something I'm into.
okay. I'm just
But
curious.
but yeah, you talk about them hiding the soldiers in that room underneath the steps there. Last time I was there, I was in the room that they had turned it. They turned into the library there in the basement, and
Right.
I was doing a EVP session with two other people on my team, and as we were getting like intelligent responses, but I just happened to look up, and as I looked up, I saw a full size like shadow figure at the bottom of the stairs, and it actually started walking, pacing, and I actually even caught it on video, and and try to debunk it, of course, and I didn't. So it's not to the point that I'm going to necessarily completely rule it as paranormal or a spirit, but I can't dismiss it either because I couldn't debunk it. So it was a good catch anyway.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most interesting things you can catch is an apparition. And as professional paranormal investigators, our job is to try to debunk everything we can, as much as possible to truthfully determine whether or not it's unexplained and possibly paranormal versus something human. The library room investigated that many times, and usually what I've noticed in there is that some pretty good EVP has been captured. Um, I haven't seen it, but somebody else had talked about seeing the shadow, what looked like a shadow of someone walking in the hall past there and going through the little door that leads to underneath the stairs, even though the door was closed. Um, Also, we've had issues, not issues. Why I still think I'm at work today. We've seen instances of objects moving. One time there was a K2 sitting on one of the museum style racks in the room. Not the real big table with the rack and display, but one off to the side. And it was a couple of inches back. It went flying off there one time. Why? I don't know, and we could not debunk that. Some people have also, put objects on the really big table to see if they would move or see if they could get something to move them. But, the jury's still out on that. I mean, some people put some cat balls up there, and yeah, eventually a couple of them jiggled a little bit. But what we were not able to ascertain, because we had actually I was running three groups with three team leads all over the house, so we weren't able to ascertain whether somebody might have been up at the next level, which would have been the first story of the house, going in and out of the door and creating a draft which could have pulled from the door leading up underneath the front stairs, and of course could have caused draft in other rooms. So we don't know that, but it was interesting nevertheless. But now the K2 falling off of that display is a lot more interesting because, I don't think any draft, at least not anything you'll find in Kentucky, would be strong enough to pull that off of the rack. And, there was nobody leaning against the rack. In fact, nobody was even sitting within at least 3 or 4 feet from that rack. So, it's not like somebody pushed it with their feet or bumped into it. But yeah, that was amazing.
What do you think? What state do you think has the most paranormal activity?
What state has the most paranormal activity?
Yeah.
I have no idea. And the reason I say that is I think most all of the paranormal activity and presences out there in the world are still untapped.
Hmm.
If you look at the locations that are investigated that yield evidence of some type of strange activity, I mean, we're talking a micro percentage of a micro percent of a double micro percent of all the locations in the world.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot more out there. When we're talking paranormal and the spirit world, I think it's much larger than we think.
Hmm.
It's not just at Octagon Hall and Waverly Hills and the Chestnut House and the Bell Witch property, but I think it's everywhere. So, asking what state has the most paranormal activity, I don't know. I would say each state has its own share of paranormal activity.
What I've been realizing, a lot of people are actually going out and ghost hunting a lot more than just staying at home.
Well,
Just,
good. They need
it's
to.
it's just it's a little weird as to why they are. It's I don't know.
Yeah, you know, yeah, there are reasons for it. Some people go out, a lot of people just go out to do it, thrill seeking.
Hmm.
They're not even on teams. They haven't even thought about having paranormal teams,
Hmm.
but just there's a lot of thrill seekers out there. Then you've got a lot of people who go to investigations just as a way to hang or socialize with their friends.
Hmm.
Then you have people who go like for the first time because they're interested in the paranormal, maybe because of an strange experience that they once had
Hmm.
or that one of their friends or loved ones had, and they just want to see for themselves, is there anything else out there?
Hmm.
And then you've got the old researcher investigators like me going out there trying to baseline a place, document evidence, debunk evidence, analyze it in hopes of making some advance
Hmm.
in the field. I mean, let's face it. I go into this place, my EMF meter goes off, beep, 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 beep. Okay. Or I get an EVP. Pat, get out.
Hmm.
Okay. How many videos or how many times has that happened in the last 30 to 40 years? How many accounts of that happening? It happens constantly. So, what some of us are striving for is new things in the paranormal world, maybe new types of evidence, to make strides in the field. The old beep beep beep, it's
Hmm.
haunted, can only go on for so long. I mean, it's been 30 or 40 years. You know, I'm interested, in things such as ITC, also more interested in the photography aspects as it relates not only to thermal photography, but to types of cameras that will cover considerably more sections of the light spectrum than your conventional cameras and even your infrared range cameras will. New strides, new ways of conducting investigations to obtain evidence of that which is unexplainable.
Do you believe? Do you believe haunted objects?
Do I believe in haunted objects? Well, wait a minute. I shouldn't ask that. You're the one asking me the question.
Yeah, yeah.
The jury is still out. It kind of like goes back to the curse versus coincidence
Mm-hmm.
deal. I mean, I've been told a lot of objects are haunted. I've been around them. I have even investigated them, but I haven't seen any particular and unique evidence surface from these objects. Maybe because I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't know. But some people have and say that there's definitely such thing as a haunted object. All too often we hear about, for example, a haunted rocking chair,
Mm-hmm.
one that everybody talks about having. There must be 600 of them, but they're all a particular haunted rocking chair that happened to be sat in by the Bell Witch. And you hear all these stories about it. But I have no way of validating that. At face value, to me, it's an old rocking chair. Do I know it's the Bell sat in that chair? Nope. Um, can we investigate it? Yes. But, it's just so hard to be able to reference back and try to validate all these claims around haunted objects unless you're actually there investigating them and can see and capture some evidence of your own. And who knows, maybe one day I will.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, um, you definitely can't dismiss somebody's experience because it's their experience. But then, like you said, I've been doing this not quite as long as you. I've been doing it for 32 years, and I consider myself, like you said, a researcher. So I want to be able to validate it. I want to see the evidence. I want to, be like you said. If it was a rocking chair that Mr. Bill sat in, I'd want to be able to validate that. Otherwise, until I could, it would just be a rocking chair. So
Yeah.
so
Oh, yeah.
Damien asked, said,
No,
comparing
no.
technology, would you say it's more accurate now compared to the past, or the results roughly the same?
With regards to, incorporating technology into investigations, well, I think technology helps in a big way. It makes some things easier. But at the end of the day, I don't think there is a substitute for the human mind and sensitivity, staying silent, looking and listening and taking in what's around you. Now, I know a lot of people will come back and say, well, if you don't have a scientific way to validate it, then how do you know it works? Well, that's where our technology and other things come in. You go to a place and someone who has been happy throughout the whole investigation, in fact, so happy that you almost have to ask them to keep it down because they're having so much fun, nobody can hear. And then all of a sudden, that person bends over, starts beating on their legs, and is crying profusely and suddenly depressed. But then you have some items, temperature alarms, EMF meter, REM pods, what have you. All this other stuff is going off too. That tells you there's some change. Something has changed to cause this person to immediately go into a deep depression, and it's being picked up by this equipment.
Hmm.
Now, of course, this is notwithstanding the EMF sensitivity condition. Some people can have really bizarre things happen when they're around a strong EMF field. But then again, we get into circular reasoning because then that begs the question, if this happened as a result of EMF sensitivity, which is a medical issue, what created this EMF over here when there are no cell phones on and there hasn't been electricity into this place in years? What's creating this EMF? And you could take your meters, and if the EMF is constant, you could check the readings at different locations as well as debunk those locations, just to make sure there's nothing generating electricity there.
Mm-hmm.
So the technology, I think the human mind is the most important thing, but I think the technology goes a long way in confirming, maybe not that something is automatically paranormal, but something is definitely amiss in the situations where people feel things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I tell I usually ask the question during the podcast, what's everybody's go-to piece of equipment? But I always say, you can't choose yourself because obviously that's the most important piece. And the other thing I think people have to realize that we have all these devices that we use to go investigate with, but for the most none of them was we've adapted them to the paranormal field. That was the original intent. So we have to
Correct.
understand how they work. What kind of force positives they're going to get. We have to know the equipment. That's just like the SLS. SLS has improved over the few years as it's been there, but when the when the when the technology first hit and it became such a big thing, it picked up. There were so many false positives because it picked up anything, and
Yes.
so yeah, you have to know your equipment. But yeah, uh, but
Yep.
I always do my team. If we're investigating a place, we always do like a walkthrough first with the EMF meter and everything, so we have a baseline and stuff.
Absolutely.
And so yeah. So I mean, yeah, the, the definitely. I think technology has helped. But that's just like I tell people a lot of time. When it comes to the REM pods, K2s, and that stuff. If they're going off, that might give us a place to focus on. But that alone is not going to prove paranormal. You need a little bit more. I like to have like double. Like if I get an EVP, I like to capture it on my Paratech too. If I get an EVP that says like an Octagon Horror, we got an EVP. We assume through research and stuff when we're talking to one of the Caldwells because what they said is I like it here. This is my home. At two different times, and we recorded on the on the voice recorder, and then I recorded on my Paratech too. Almost the exact same wording. So
Yeah.
so that's a double rail there. So
Absolutely, and that's a great idea. I just can't overemphasize the importance of technology, and sometimes corroborating witness testimony. To validate. Because I mean, let's face it. I could sit here right now and say, "Oh my goodness, I feel something really strange. There's just a strange force going on. The air doesn't feel right. I'm about to get sick." But the other people next to me, they don't know that because, it's like you said earlier, it's my experience. They don't know that. But then if some equipment and other things indicate that there's something going on, then there you go. That may still be one of those strange coincidences I talked about earlier, but it gives some credence to the idea that there is something going on here and it has affected me even though it hasn't affected the others. But one thing you got to watch out for is when the equipment goes off and suggests something's happening or we get some activity, and then people suddenly start feeling bad after that. I've been on some I mean, that happens some, and it's totally legit. But I've been on some investigations where nobody acts like anything's wrong, but as soon as somebody else says they feel something, they say they felt something. Or as soon as the REM pod starts going off in the other room, the same person speaks up and says, "That's strange, because about 5 minutes ago I was feeling something weird."
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, if you're feeling something weird, why didn't you tag it and tell us? But anyways, neither here nor there. But yeah, technology is a good confirmation tool, and knowing your equipment and why it's used. And I mean, it doesn't mean we all have to be electronics engineers, but, basically understanding what we're detecting, the difference between a monofield and a tri-field EMF meter. Uh, what are we dealing with? What a REM pod. And then I'll talk about another simple thing, which can be used effectively, even though it can also be used ineffectively. That is the simple flashlight. I'm sure you've heard of the flashlight method. You
Yep.
separate the conductors between the battery and the light to where there's not hardly any room between them, but enough to break the connection. Okay, what we have there, it's not so much of a paranormal investigative technique as it is a science experiment with thermal energy. That's what it is. Yeah, eventually an arc's going to happen. It's going to become warm. The contacts are going to touch. The light's going to come on. Then it may go off for a little bit and come on. And, you know, I think it's essential people understand how that works. So then the next question is, so what makes it paranormal? Or, hey, Pat, why do you go around talking to flashlights all the time? Some of us do. Well, not all the time, but can. And here's the rub with that flashlight. If there's something in here, somebody's in here, make the light come on. It comes on. Okay, there's not much there. Probably a coincidence. Okay, so we say, Mr. Caldwell, if you're here, try and make that candle light up and stay lit for 3 seconds, then turn off for 3 seconds, and then light up 3 times in a row very quickly. And if you see the flashlight do that, I think you may be onto something. And notice I didn't say flashlight when I was talking to Mr. Caldwell. I said candle. Simply put, he died in 1866. They didn't have flashlights
So
back then. They had candles. And, I see a lot of that. People will use modern terminology when trying to evoke a response from a spirit from years ago. Flashlights, they can be handy, but only if you get a very unique, specific response. Otherwise, you can write it off as thermal energy. Then another thing, oh, the SB7 and these other ones, the spirit boxes. In other words, a radio receiver with a hopped up variable capacitor that essentially puts the tuner on steroids. That's all it is. So you're going to start hearing basically little pieces of voices from different radio DJs and talk show hosts saying different things coming across very quickly as the frequency spectrum is scanned. Okay, so when does it become a valid paranormal investigator tool? Okay, let's assume for a minute my father's name was John. It wasn't, but let's assume his name was John. Hey, if there are any entities in this room who know me, what was my father's name? All of a sudden you hear John come across the spirit box. Well, I think it's fairly reasonable to expect radio DJs and talk show hosts or whoever's voices that are scanning to use the word John. Okay, well, what if my father's name was Ephraim Leviticus Fitzhugh the third? And I said, what's my father's name? And all of a sudden the spirit box says Ephraim Leviticus Fitzhugh the third. Then at that point, we're on to something. So, that's two things with paranormal investigation that when I do my events, I try to school people on if they don't already know is, we're not necessarily looking for any response out of anything. We need to look at what's unique. That's that's very, very, very big.
yeah, you touched on something earlier that I tell people all the time. I even post on my page every so often. When we're doing an investigation, you know, uh, I try to do everything from a research scientific standpoint. I understand that's a pseudoscience, so whatever, but whenever I'm talking to spirit, whatever, I try to talk to it just like I'm talking to you. Just have a conversation with it. And when I'm using my equipment, I explain it to them. Because like you said, most of these spirits, died before. They don't know what a REM pod is, or a voice recorder, or even a flashlight. So explain to them. I even like to ask them if I could take their picture. You and explain it to them. So um,
Yeah, we
yeah.
do that.
So I actually, talking about the flashlight technique. I actually have never been a big person on the flashlight investigation, but I did a residential investigation at this house in Union City, Tennessee, and
Oh yeah.
and it was a really malevolent spirit, but that ended up being the only way that the spirit would actually communicate with us. Like, he kept playing games with us for most of the investigation, and we finally got there was a me and another guy. We're both pretty good sized guys, and we was able to track the spirit up to the attic. And I'm not talking about a finished attic. I'm talking about a crawl space attic. So we had two guys that are about 6 foot, two, 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 230, built guys laying in this basement talking to the spirit, and the flashlight is ended up being the only way that the spirit would communicate with us. So uh, sometimes like you said, sometimes it's all about how the spirit wants to communicate with us. Some you know and we can't. We might go to a place that may be the most haunted place in the world to most people, but that don't mean that we're going to get something, because spirits, they're not trained monkeys. They're going, if they
They're
wanted, if they
they spirits are like us, basically.
They were us
Yeah.
once upon a time. And
yes.
you hit a really good point there. You've got to treat whatever's there with respect, and don't come in all, a lot of people go into all these places. I've seen it a million times. People go in a place half cocked, and like, if you're in here, I'm going to get you, I'm going to
Provoking.
expose you, and then the provoking and the cursing and all that, and that's done by a lot of those people, not paranormal investigators, but
Hmm.
those who play us on TV. In other words,
Actors.
actors. Right, and I don't know that all of them do a very good job of playing us on TV. And then us, we're so busy, we don't have time to get on TV that much. We're busy investigating. So, yeah, treat them with respect. My events, when I do those, I will usually lead off a room or whatever we're investigating by saying, okay, we're here just to come around and visit with you and hopefully, give you some attention. You may be lonely. We're not here. We're not a bunch of lawyers. We're not going to question you about everything. We're not here to exploit you, and we certainly don't want to upset you. So, you're kind of level setting there and creating an understanding, and also an understanding among the other investigators. That is, assuming it's a public investigation and it's not a team, because a team would already know that. And, you have to go from there. And it's careful to be, you've got to be in their language too. I'm looking at something on my screen. I don't know. Something was trying to eat my face off just a minute ago. I kept scratching, and now I'm seeing this bizarre thing. But I'm not seeing it on the actual show. But it's like a cloud going over my head. Maybe I set something off. But at any rate, we got to speak their language. I never will forget an investigation. This was a while back. This was probably around 2001. An investigation at a place. It was in northern Georgia, and we had investigators, or I guess first timer investigators, I would hope, try and communicate with the spirits of German immigrants using modern day slang.
Hmm.
talking about some confused and possibly ticked off spirits. Um, not that I would expect everybody in the event to know German, but at least say Guten Tag for good night or something, or maybe even some English. And I've also seen where people have tried to communicate with entities from abroad, like with an Asian background, Asian entities. And, it's like, make that flashlight go off. And I'm thinking, would somebody who lived in China 1,000 years ago know what a flashlight is? Would they speak English? And the same thing holds true. And there was an interesting experience I had one time on an investigation with a group with Native Americans. Native Americans from long ago spoke different languages. They all didn't speak what you would call Native American language. There was different strains of the language and dialect that was common among the different tribes and in the different regions. And there was an investigation done. I had an event. This was up in, I believe, East Tennessee one time, and I had zeroed in that we were dealing with something possibly Native American, and this lady of Native American descent was there at the investigation. And she told me that the Native Americans who lived in that region hundreds of years ago spoke this certain language, and she knew some of the words. So she wanted to try those words out. And when she tried those words out, all heck broke loose in the form of getting a lot of evidence. And later on, we found out EVPs, even though we couldn't understand them, we could hear what sounded like voices, and they certainly weren't ours. So in that case, we were lucky enough to have somebody with us who knew the strain of Native American language used in that area. And we were able to use that to establish communication with the entity there.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important. You see the popular meme going around all the time that says uh, investigating a haunted house from Germany and speak perfect English. It doesn't really work that way. We have a location that we got to investigate with my friend Gavin Kelly and stuff. We were the first team to ever get investigated. It was a seed mill that was built by POWs during World War II. It's over here in Kentucky. We're actually going back to it this month, and they spoke German and Yugoslavian because they were Yugoslavian POWs. So
Right.
we actually had a translator. We actually used a translator to communicate with them because if they knew English, they probably didn't like it very much since they were POWs of America. So yeah, you have to be able to communicate with the spirits. So
Yeah.
anyway, this
Do you believe Native Americans are mean or nice? Like nice or mean? Because there's a lot of mean Native Americans back then.
Um, I've never met a Native American person or person of Native American ancestry that I thought was
Mhm.
mean. And I've always been of the opinion that the Native Americans have always been a very peaceful society, unless they were treated wrongly and provoked in that way, such as having their early settlements attacked by settlers trying to force them out and taking shots at them. And in a case like that, I wouldn't consider that mean. I would say they were standing their ground. There's also, you see in the movies, Native Americans going around scalping people and stuff like that. I don't know the circumstances behind all the scalpings and things, whether they were fighting for their land that was theirs first or what. But in general, I don't, I
Well,
don't, I
we
don't see anything mean about it.
we we took their land. We did
Right?
basically.
We were the intruders,
Yeah.
yep, yep. I
and
mean,
again, if somebody is intruding on you or otherwise trying to create problems for you, I do not think that you're mean or hateful
Hmm.
for standing up for yourself and standing your ground.
Okay. I so I'm going to wrap us up here before too long.
Hmm.
But let Pat let everybody know what you're working on now, and with like if you got any events you're going to be at soon, where they can see you or talk, where they can meet you, how to get a hold of you, or where to get your books, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. As far as events, there are a few booked right now, and there are several ready to be announced, but just not ready to announce those yet. Um, at the end of October, I think it's the weekend of the 26th, I'll be speaking both days at the Arkansas Paranormal Expo in Little Rock. It's one of the largest, most prestigious paracons in the country. We'll have a lot of people there speaking, a lot of vendors, whole lot going on, and I'm really glad to be there. And I'll be there another year this year. Also on the 25th of October, on the way to Arkansas, I'll be doing an appearance at the Water Valley, Mississippi Library. Water Valley, Mississippi is where Betsy Bell moved later on in life, and she's buried nearby. And the Bell Witch story is very popular there. And of course, there's also, in addition to the Bell Witch of Tennessee, there's also a Bell Witch of Mississippi legend. So I'll be there. I think it's from noon till 2. There will be a Bell Witch lecture followed by a book signing and meet greet. Then got a real big thing coming early September, but not ready to announce that one just yet. Um, and another really big thing in mid October coming up. People just have to stay tuned to the pages to find out when those come up. Got a paranormal investigation event at the Smith County Courthouse in Middle Tennessee, August 30th.
Good location. I've
That,
been there.
yeah, you have, yeah. I've heard it's a good location. We're looking forward to it. Actually, that event sold out, so we won't be able to bring anybody else in on that event. Um, Also, let's see, and a few more things. There's some things that have been announced, but there's actually more in the works right now that hasn't been announced for this year that already has. So a lot going on there. So regarding the books, I have my Bell Witch book is called The Bell Witch: The Full Account. It was originally written many years ago and is updated periodically. The latest update was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. The Bell Witch: The Full Account. You can find it at online retailers as well as some of the bricks and mortar bookstores. Also, I have a book called Ghostly Cries from Dixie. Can be gotten at the same place. The Bell Witch website, called the Bell Witch site, that's been my website since the mid to late 1990s. And that has a lot about the Bell Witch in it and some of the information that I found in my research, as well as the story. And that is at www.bellwitch.org. And I, of course, have, all the social media pages that everybody else has, Facebook, Twitter, or X rather, and Instagram. So we got that. And I also have my author website, which is www.patfitzhugh.com.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. I enjoyed it. Good visiting with you. And like I told you a couple weeks ago, as close as we are, we need to get together sometime and investigate, hang out, both. And
Yeah, let's do that. We need to plan on that for sure.
we can definitely do that. And so thank you. And we will see you and talk to you again soon.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. I really, really enjoyed it and look forward to meeting you both soon. So have a great night and take
Hmm.
care.
You too.